Welcome to ReFocus, a podcast that helps you find your focus to build a thriving creative career in the music industry. I'm your host, Rosalyn Dennett. Hello and welcome to ReFocus. Today we're speaking with Kejo Buchanan, who's a knowledge sharer and creative, investing her focus and time as a librarian at the Toronto Reference Library Arts Department and curates folk acoustic sounds through community radio at cjru.ca and is the executive producer for folkrecovery.org. Welcome, Kejo.
Thank you, Rosalyn.
I'm so excited to speak with you because I find the Folk Recovery Project just absolutely fascinating. It's been such a pleasure to get to dig through the materials that you've been publishing. Can you tell me a little bit about where the origins of this project started and how it came to be?
Folk recovery is, as the tagline says, it is exactly what it is. It's celebrating and archiving BIPOC Canadian folk storytellers and their contributions to the Canadian folk sound. And how this started is, I'm not going to get into too much of it because often it's an accumulation of things and events that happen. And one of the things that was happening for me a few years ago in 2021 is I was wrapping up my MLIS, my Master in Library and Information Science study. And as I'm wrapping up this, a lot of other things are already happening. I'm working with Jolly Journey, which is my folk show through CJRU. And I'm also meeting a lot of great artists and already had great conversations with them. So all of these things are kind of coming together. And I'm also studying an oral history course. So as all of these things are coming together, I am piecing together, and I'll name all my storytellers shortly. I realize this is what I want to show up and do. I do it for my project, for my oral history class, but I realize this is a real life project that can actually come together. And I'm talking to the station manager and just trying to figure out different ways to get funding to get started on this project, because I want it to be something that people will be compensated for their time to work on and not completely volunteer based. And so to do that, you have to really get organized and talk to people. And I was also doing a course on, grant writing at the same time. So sometimes things are just in synchronicity and you just kind of realize it's like, oh, this has to happen. This isn't just an idea to complete this project, but really needs to happen. The birth of folk recovery comes from just listening to artists and responding to what it is that they need, but also what it is that I am in a position to offer as a librarian and as a radio host and somebody who's a part of the industry in this way. So that's the basic starting of it, all the different people and parts.
Yeah, the people, I'll do a special shout out to some FMO alumni that are in there. Up right now, I think you have the full interview and transcript with Kaya Cater and Joni Narita.
Yes, and she's been a great champion of the project as well. Yeah, that Joni Narita is actually my advisor on the project, someone who really understands the industry. And also, I've had great interviews with May Chung, with Ansley Simpson, and up next, if depending on when you're listening, it may be already ready for you, is Amandalo Wanakosuria, who's also been a great friend in me putting this together. So all of these storytellers aren't just their storytellers, but they've donated their time and often advice for me to even get started. I should also mention an earlier conversation that I had with Kaya. So I actually had an interview that I used a clip of in my final project. And that's also a part of the inspiration. And that was talking about the origins of the banjo and also how we show up as Black people in spaces and showing up as our full selves. And this was a very important part of our conversation. And I realized, that's interesting. Here is this genre of folk music that we are very much a part of, and sometimes often is missed in the education and understanding of, not only in music, because I studied art history, and sometimes when you're studying those things, it's completely on the Western canon and forgets to show the parallels of everyone that is evolving and contributing to that media throughout time. And as BIPOC people here in Canada, Black, Indigenous, and as well as Asian and all racialized people here in Canada. We have been contributing to the traditional sounds of folk and even in the pre-colonial context for a very long time. And so it's very important to highlight and celebrate that as a part of the dialogue and understanding of what folk music really means. We're using Canada as our backdrop, but what it means here, right? What it means here on Turtle Island and what that comes together as.
There was an interesting thread between the interview with Kaya and the interview with Joni. They're both talking about the banjo, and they kind of came at it from two different sides, where, Kaya's been involved with the Black Banjo Reclamation Project, and she was involved with the Black Music Summit recently at Folk Alliance and has done a lot of work in that space. And as a Black banjo player, been really open about talking about that journey. And Joni kind of came at it from the opposite side of seeing it as like a colonial instrument. And it was interesting to see how, that you can kind of look at it from either side. And
it's an instrument that is confused to be a colonial instrument, but it's not who you think is the origins of the instrument. And yes, and Kaya gets into that, of course, gets into the details of that this is something that has been affiliated with white supremacy, this instrument. And so therefore we don't want to touch it, not realizing it's just that we don't want to touch it anymore, that we have already designed it and been a part of it. And so it's nice to see those reclamation projects. And that is a part of what folk recovery is about. These artists sharing their own story in their own words and how they're finding their own space and see themselves as folk. Because Joni has a piano. And you're going to see this as an interesting theme that will run through other storytellers. And so therefore that all of a sudden excludes you as a folk artist because you have a keyboard. And she gets into that part as well, which is very interesting.
You start off your interviews with the "I am folk because" question, which I love so much. It's a question that I see people asking themselves a lot. Certainly, there's always been gatekeepers that have made folks feel excluded. But then I also, if you don't see yourself the way that you look or where you're coming from represented, you may exclude yourself from it. And that can be, like Joni is saying, as like, I don't see my instrument represented here. So even just the instrument that I'm playing doesn't make me feel
welcome. Yeah.
Like, I wonder if you didn't already feel excluded, would you just pull at your keyboard? And if you already felt like fully included, would that be a barrier? Because there's still that feeling of exclusion that you're judging even like the instrument that you're playing and whether or not that's folk.
Yeah, you're questioning how you're showing up, the instrument you use. And for me personally, I would have to say that, yes, I question whether or not I am folk, even though I've chosen this genre or it's chosen me to be a part of it, starting with Jelly Journey. But it was already there, even though I consider myself before more of a jazz head. But I'm also very folk. And I'm not putting on airs. It's really that strong connective sense of community, of staying present in the moment and what's happening in our world. And also an intention that I forgot that I even made, even while I was early studying things, because I also come from a nonprofit database background. So I'm always picking community first in everything that I'm doing. And I have to be honest about that. That is my path. That is where I'm going. And so that's how I know I am folk. I realize I am concerned. I'm concerned about the kind of information that we're sharing and that we're keeping. I want to see things, and I know a lot of people like yourself are out there. We want to see things better. So how are we invested? And how are we showing up as responsible ancestors? And so we understand this. And so that's how I know, even though in the past I'd be concerned about, oh, do I have the right to be a part of this genre? I don't have the same background. It's been a while since I picked up my cello. Do I know what I'm talking about? And I don't have all the lingo, and I probably don't read music as well as I could when I did when I was in high school. But
it's folk. You don't have to know how to
It doesn't mean there isn't quality, but at the same time, it is exactly that. It is folk. I can come with my spoken word and it's still acceptable. I can do my own music making with my darbuka and kalimba on my own time, And it's fine. And not everything I produce needs to be produced for, the mass consumption. It could be intimate, like this conversation right now, however far or wide it reaches, that's where it needs to go. And that's how I realized, yeah, this is a place I felt surprisingly, and I do mean it, I mean surprisingly welcomed, because I've been in other spaces, creative spaces, that didn't feel so warm and didn't feel so welcome. So perhaps the timing is right. Perhaps the people are right that I'm connecting with. But yeah, I've been fortunate. I mean, you still have to kind of protect your energy in certain situations. Like you said, there are going to be gatekeepers. But I realize it's like those gatekeepers have somehow been pushed to the periphery because all the people I really need seem to be coming forward first. I know they're there, but they're kind of like over here, And it's like, it's okay, you can stay over there. Because now all the people that I really need, people like yourself, Rosalyn, that really want to have these honest conversations and be a part of the community and that connection, just keep showing up, and they show up for this project, and they give their time, whether as a team member or as a community partner in some way, or as a storyteller, but they're giving their time. And I'm so grateful to that. And I'm so grateful to learning about folk in that way. Like I'm learning about music in that way now. And it's a different kind of method than some of the other ways, which are still good. But
you mentioned some of the instruments that you play, some of the many instruments it seems like you play. How did you get connected with those instruments, and what was your journey discovering music?
I'll try not to get too down. I was born in, you can step for I'll try not to get too far back. I'll try to surmise each moment. But let's start with childhood. Childhood, I've had the fortune of my grandfather and a great aunt purchasing a bright piano for me. Of course, because as much and loving as parents can be, they can really suck the joy out of something that you want to learn. It's like, did you practice? Did you practice? And I didn't have the focus that I know some people really have when they're musicians. And that's the other reason why sometimes I felt a little intimidated, because I know people live, sleep, and breathe this in their childhood. I was not one of those kids. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not a musician then, because I just don't live and breathe this. I realized listening to other artists, some have learned in more non-traditional ways, even learned how to play the piano. I did do the Royal Conservatory, but I've realized, like I was even listening to, I don't know if you saw the film of Buffy St. Marie's documentary autobiography, and she mentions that her way of just like freestyling, learning the piano. That is not how I was learning the piano. And maybe that's part of the problem, is understanding the kind of learner you are. And that's what I know now that I didn't know then. Other ways that I really dived in is by the time I'm in high school, I realized I love the cello. I love the sound of it. I love everything about it. And so I started playing the cello. And this time we're doing Suzuki style, for those of you following the type of schools I used. And I did the Suzuki style for that. And I actually did like it better than the Royal Conservatory. I realized there's just something freer about it. And I think it's also because of who my teachers were, right? I had this great teacher, Mrs. Graves. She's out in Oakville, and she has passed away, but she was one of those great leaders in teaching children about music, and really kind of open. And she even invited me out to like her own quartet, where I'm playing, here I am a teenager playing with these old white ladies at seniors' homes. And that's how I know I'm folk, because I felt fine and completely comfortable playing my cello in that environment, not because of the audience, but the fact that I can connect based on the music, on the sound, is what makes it folk. Like I am flexible in just being where the music is, and not worrying and judging so much who the teachers are, but really understanding this is where I need to be. And later on, fast forward, I'm out with a friend of mine and her husband, and they're musicians, and they're very folky and very nomadic. And they're the get in the van, go across Canada type. And they happen to be passing through Toronto. And there is this Arabic festival that's going on in the square here. I'm in Toronto, by the way, to Toronto, for those of you listening. And in this city hall, they have these festivals throughout the summers, and this cultural festival happens to be an Arabic one. And there is a Egyptian vendor, who has a darbuka, and it's the end of the night. And my friend's like, "Oh, it's beautiful. I want to buy it." Da, 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 da. Pardon my fake Quebecois accent, but there it is. And I'm like, I don't know, because you got those very vibrant, fiery. She's the fiery personality. And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, "Oh, I'm going to buy it. If you don't buy it, I'm I'm going to buy it. And I end up buying it. She buys it and then I purchase it from her. And yeah, my darbuka is in Saroma, I call it. And it's from the Andinkra, the symbol of the stars. So that Akan belief of the stars, because it's made of ceramic and it has like a lot of diamonds on it that reminds me of the stars. And I feel like it is a healing communicator for me. It is something, if you've ever watched some of my posts on IG, I've been very honest about and I look forward to being out in the spring playing it. I'm sure my neighbors would appreciate that too. And I'm learning whatever is on YouTube and sometimes just playing along as I'm learning other songs using my darbuka. So it's been a great healing thing for me. And the kalimba is just like a little fun thing. You just kind of just play a few notes and hum and make up songs. And so, yeah, I've been using my kalimba. I've been learning some more traditional playing as well as just my own freestyle playing with the darbuka. And I look forward to being braver with it because instruments, and this specific instrument needs dancers, which means you got to be with a crew, you got to be with other people. So eventually maybe I'll find, or they will find me and I'll get to play with them and they'll get to dance.
I'm sure
them.
you can, like, if you're in Toronto, head out to a park with your kalimba, you'll get
I
dancers.
think so.
The dancers will come to you.
I think so. I don't think I have to try that hard. I just have to be brave and just, put it in my carrier and just go. So I think, as things get warmer, I'm just going to just take it out there and we'll start our own drum circle and see what happens.
Okay. So Toronto listeners, keep your ears open when you're walking around in the summer. But I love that your journey into folk was kind of like a freeing, like finding music that made you feel free to explore, you know?
Exactly. That's exactly it, Rosalyn. I found music that was a little more into the freestyle that I needed to explore and be a part of. Yeah, absolutely.
I love that there was a place where you found community as well. In my own journey, it took me a long time to realize that was the ticket for me. I did Suzuki Method as well, which, and I'm not necessarily going to, I'm not going to like shout out Suzuki Method necessarily. It's a whole thing, but but the nice thing about it is that at least it develops your ear.
I did appreciate that.
Yeah, like while learning traditional styles, and I also like cannot read music for the life of me, which is really expected of you, I think, both for piano and
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you because they have keyboards at my work, right? So we have 2 keyboard rooms where you can go and play keyboard. And I'm trying hard, not realizing I actually ended up picking one of the easiest songs. So I pick Bill Withers. Sorry, it'll come to me in a second. I've been playing this song over and over again and now I'm forgetting. And so as I'm playing this song, because it's in the key of C, I'm still counting. I'm like literally counting the lines, and I'm trying to find what were the cheat notes on the, because I can't like I know where they are on the keyboard. If you say okay, find middle C, I can find these things, but trying to correlate my brain and reading that note, and this is supposed to be over there, it's lost. It's a lost cause, and it's one hand at a time. Either we're doing the left or the right today, and the chords better be simple because, wow, it's just, So maybe that was too much disclosure. Maybe I just incriminated myself. But there,
no, I'm right there with you. Yeah, it's interesting when you can take yourself out of that and remove that expectation.
Yeah,
and the expectation is just to communicate music with either another person or with your own feeling to yourself or to the stars or wherever you're communicating that. That's amazing that you were able to find that. I feel like not all folks do, and they keep up those expectations, right? That it's like this way or nothing, and some people don't find that community. So that's amazing that you did.
Yeah, I've been very lucky. And I think it's also just making that intention and then being open and flexible to it. Because the people are there, but you have to really, for me anyway, I needed to really make an intention and say, this is what I want to be a part of. I'm not going to be all judgy about it. I'm really going to be honest and say, okay, this is what I need to be a part of and navigate through that kind of space, because I'll take away all that extra expectation and judgment. Oh, I don't know all the notes for this. I can't name this song right off the top of my head. Do I belong in this place? And it's like, no, some people have a very extensive repertoire in their head, which is beautiful. But I realize even as a librarian, I look things up. That's how I know.
It's knowing how to look things up. That's the
I count the lines. I count the lines, look things up if it's necessary. But outside of that, yeah, there's other ways in, and I guess this is where we're embracing this when we do podcasting and so on in music. And there's other ways in orality that we can in the audio world, and we can start to really embrace our own learning and understanding, right? Sightseeing does not have to just be from what you read, but also maybe how the note feels. You know, one of the things I really loved in high school was in actually grade school. You know, when you had to do band in like grade 7 and 8, I played the trombone.
Yes.
And the trombone is totally about breath and the weight and the feel. It doesn't matter what note's on there, whatever. You better know how that note feels. Because if you don't know, it's not happening. It's a very different kind of experience because it's not the same as positioning with your hands and stuff. Yeah, there's some positioning, but a lot of what's coming out is going to be how it feels. And you have to memorize that kind of in your stomach, in your diaphragm. You have to remember, how does this note feel again? Yeah.
That's so interesting. And it's another one where it's feel, it's muscle memory.
It's a muscle.
It's
That's
ear.
what I'm thinking. Yeah, muscle memory. Yeah.
But I like that image of like, how does this note feel?
Yeah. I
know you were at the FMO conference this year. I'm not sure if you were at the panel that we did, the what is folk? What is
Yes, I did.
Who, what, where, why.
And you're there with, I believe, Janice Jolie and
Morgan Tony, Tressa Levasseur, Chris White.
That's right.
But it's a conversation that I feel like just has kept going, and it's one that I think is so important now because we have this kind of chance, I guess, or maybe I'm speaking from more of my organizational hat, but like we do have this like chance to do some redefining of what it is. And I wanted to ask you, like, what you think, what is your definition of folk? Like, what are the different stars in your constellation of what folk is?
Well, I don't know. It might be unfair for me to say because I've been hearing everybody else's definitions in these past projects. So I was like, am I just like emulating and mirroring what I've heard? But for me, and it continues to be my place in understanding what folk is that it is coming from our own human tradition, and it is not based in any specific language. It is not based in any specific geographic origin other than being from Earth. And so for me, folk is exactly that. It is that traditional storytelling that comes from us. And that's where you have the folklorists and the people who, for me, I'm carrying it through the spirit of the Jali, of course, which is the West African griot, the storyteller and the knowledge keeper and sharer through that tradition of orality and oral history. And that's how I show up as folk. But I realize there are different dimensions of it that are still a part of that tradition of our human experience. And that's what folk for me is. It is that tradition of our human experience, and we're bringing that all in. That's what it is.
I love that. There's like an interest. So you brought up kind of folklore and like the keeping and the telling of our stories. There's like a word that's used sometimes called like the folk process, which I feel like doesn't get brought up a lot too much when I've been having these conversations, but it's just like another word that's associated with folk, the folk process.
The folk process.
And the folk process, when I've come across that word, is like the means of like creation, like when you're creating new work out of tradition.
Yes.
And the new work out of like traditional
And that could be artisans,
music.
That could be anything. Yeah. I like that. That is quite beautiful. Yes. Creating new out of tradition. That is a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I like being situated in the present, but then having that like folklore and lore being, recognizing of the history of where things are going, and then maybe the process, or maybe there's some other word, folk futures, I don't know, of like how we create and how we move forward.
Because we're taking that with us. We're taking our inheritance with us, and we're bringing that forward, not just leaving it way in the back.
What's so beautiful about this genre too is that it leaves room for collaboration and for conversation in music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because you're not so restrictive. Personally, I am very much, and it's hard to accept sometimes in life, that I'm just a nonconformist. When I have a certain natural nomadic
Yes.
behavior, and it's like, your folk, right? Like,
You know your folk
when?
when.
This is more like, your folk when you have a certain kind of
How
natural
many
thing.
times have you moved in the last 20 years?
Oh my gosh. And I'm just so proficient at it. It's kind of sad, but exciting at the same time.
It takes all kind of folk.
It does, but it's just so funny. There are just certain things I realize that parallel in my personality, and it's like, well, it's kind of already a part of who I am when I am stripping away all the airs and the masks and everything else. And I realize it's like, oh, okay. All right. And that's okay. It's okay to be this person regardless, but it's nice to find community while you're being yourself. It really is nice.
I feel like as a genre, we're in a good place to be asking ourselves questions.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and asking those honest questions that maybe in other spaces you might feel too much pressure not to. It's like, oh, we got to keep it light and we got to keep it this. And I love folk because while I'm using it in this way, I curate music in this way. Sometimes it is light and fun, but sometimes I find I love the fact that it can be so soft and gentle and then heavy hitting at the same time. And it's like, where can you do that? Where can you really hit people with such blunt honesty and they still feel like, yeah, I want to hear more. I want to understand more. So I feel like, yeah, we're in a time where we can really open up that dialogue and that understanding and really make room for each other and just kick back and exchange and listen.
Speaking of listening, your radio program, can you tell me a little bit about why you've chosen to invest your time in that and the work you do there?
Well, it's a blend of things, not to sound too egotistical, but clearly the voice is my gift and I need to just accept and say thank you to the ancestors for that, which is interesting because I was a very quiet child. But one of the things I do remember doing when I was very young, I used to play radio. And
Nice.
yeah, I would be in my grandfather's basement, actually the same grandfather who I probably got a lot of my voice from. He's like this kind of like, I don't know, he's probably at least 6 feet tall, if not 5'11". He's a big man and he had a very boisterous laugh and a very, very deep voice. And his basement, and it's back in the olden days, kids of the 70s and 80s. And it was the 80s, but they still had the 70s look, the shag carpet and the wood paneling basement.
Yes.
And I'm sure there was an 8-track player somewhere in the corner that now serves the place to put the fish aquarium. You know the deal, you know the spiel. And then the stereo system, which is not what you expect today. It has to have all the different levels and the equalizers and all the other parts and buttons that I have no idea even still need to learn how to use today. I'm not a sound producer. So thank you to the sound producers. So it has all of that. And of course, a turntable. And all of my aunts and uncles are like 10 years older than me. So they're teenagers and I'm a child. And they have all their mixes of music in there. And so, yeah, I just find my favorites. I'm sure there was the Gap Band in there. I wasn't at the level to understand. There was some music in there. Let's just say that it was probably a little more jazzy and experimental for me to understand. I wasn't there yet. But I remember I loved the process. And here's another one from, and I'd put it onto the turntable. And it's nobody ever told me I had to do this. The only thing that was even close to it was the fact that my teenage brother was also a DJ in high school. And so a lot of my lullabies are like these old school kind of rock and hip hop beats that I don't even realize that I know until I hear the song in full. And it's like, that's the song, right? Because I only know the one beat looping over and over again. I know big beat and all these other different sounds. And so that's my intro. That is my early childhood intro. It's all these different moving parts. Me pretending to be a DJ and playing radio host, and my brother who's also actually a DJ at the time, and all of these influences coming in. And so fast forward, I'm asking me, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? And I realized I want to be on the radio. And I tried it out with another radio station, but as a volunteer, I wasn't as actively involved in the radio production part. It was more like with the fundraising and all that kind of stuff. And I realized that's not really what I want to do. And then I have an uncle who does radio and told me about CGRU actually. And he's like, you should just, put it in. And of course I was intimidated, that kind of imposter syndrome. Oh no, I can't do that. I didn't study broadcasting. I can't be on the radio. I don't know what I'm doing. I realized it's like, it doesn't matter. We're all there's traditional ways in which you enter this media and you learn what all those equalizers are for. And then there is the way that I've learned to do it, and that is the folk way. I learned through the station, and I've been very fortunate to be working with people at the station. And these are students taking on these great roles in the sound and in music and events. Yeah, just going to give a shout out to Gabby Clark. Thank you. And thank you, Kalisa. These are some of the people on there, and Sean, that are at the CGRU environment that have just shown me what I needed to know to put a show together. When it was time, it was Kalisa that says to me, you know what, you need to get your own show. And then I'm like, what should I do? And this is where the teetering between the jazz, should I just go with, it's like, no, something said no folk. And another artist who probably doesn't realize this is part of my decision making was Alex Kuba, because he has a long conversation about what is folk and what is world music and then what is folk music. And that's coming into that, understanding that. And then I tell Alyssa, the station manager, okay, I'm going to do this folk show. And then Sean is the one who drops Kaya Cater's name to me. And at the top of every single Jali journey is Kaya Cater playing Rose on the Mountain on the banjo. And so there we have it. We finally have Jali Journey. We know why we're doing it. There's no hard, fast rules, but it is going to be showcasing a lot of BIPOC folk artists anywhere in the world. And regardless of the style of folk that they're doing, folk acoustic sound, that is the main focus of this. Yeah, that's my refocus. It is just getting that and realizing that's how I ended up on radio. I'm just following natural intuition, accepting help when I needed it, where I needed it, and then bringing that together. And then that's how Jali Journey is born. And I'm so grateful to that. And I'm so grateful to the people I'm able to meet through it as well.
So interesting that you were saying that, I didn't practice piano enough. Oh, you were practicing radio DJing. So
exactly. I was too busy being a curator of music. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't have time to play the piano because I'm going to be
Good thing you spent all those hours practicing in your basement. Yeah, that's incredible.
Exactly. I just had to know how to drop the needle. That was it. That was my at the right moment, right?
I also just came up with just the worst comment when you were talking about like that feeling of, talked about this a bit in this podcast, is like the feeling of imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And especially for women, this comes up a lot. And the phrase that I was thinking of was like, you just gotta like folk around and find out.
Exactly.
Just fire
I love it. That's it. We're just gonna folk around.
We're just gonna
folk around a bit and see what we come up with. That's it. I like it. Just folk around.
Oh gosh, maybe that's, I don't know if that's common or not, and maybe it's not. Maybe people are afraid to admit that they don't have all the answers and that they're not coming into something with all the experience and answers that they need, and that you can come somewhere with an interest.
Yeah, and learn as you go along, and I'm willing to continue that investment and learn through all of you as I go along. So it's like, yeah, I can still humble myself in the process, but at the same time, it doesn't mean I don't belong here. And I think that's that's where the gatekeepers get a little bit. Have you been putting in your blood, sweat, and tears? No, but I have been alive for 47 years. And so I have been living and contributing in other spaces that maybe you didn't see me and I didn't see you, but I am bringing experience into this space, and that's the other thing people have to give themselves credit for. It's like, you've been alive for quite some time, so maybe you should consider that life experience still has value, and you're just pulling other skills. That's the great thing about also being a librarian. It's multidisciplinary. You're bringing in all the other skills and pieces and experiences, and you're bringing it into this space now. And so it looks, yes, I look very fresh and new for a lot of people. Some people are okay with that. Some people are like, I don't know, you haven't been here for 20, 30 years like I have. Yeah, but I've been sharing the planet with you for 47 years, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry I'm a little late for you, but not really. Sorry, not sorry. But I'm happy to be here now. I'm happy to be a part of this now. So yeah, just folk around, like you said.
I'm incredibly glad that you're here in the here and now.
Thank you.
And it's
I'm glad you're here too, Rosalyn.
Thank you. It's been so great to chat with you. Can you let us know where we can find out more about you, more about the different projects you're working on?
I guess the easiest way to find me is I am on Instagram and Twitter. If you go to Kejo, Kejo Buchanan, Buchanan. And I also have a link tree. So those are the easiest ways to see, because my link tree gives you more of an idea of where I am creatively, what I'm doing in terms of, I've been putting the poetry on the backdrop, but totally forward with Jolly Journey right now, and with the executive producing for Folk Recovery. And of course, I am available as your public librarian if you're doing your own research in the arts, and that's on the 5th floor at Toronto Reference Library.
That's incredible. And we'll put a link to Folk Recovery and Jelly Journey,
yes, please,
as well in the
thank you. Yeah,
in the show notes. And
that'd be wonderful.
Kejo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rosalyn, for inviting me, and thank you for the great work and your team behind you.
That's it for this episode of Refocus. Please subscribe, rate, and review on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. For more information, you can visit us at folkmusicontario.org and follow us on social media at folkmusicontario. This Refocus session is brought to you through the generous support of the Department of Canadian Heritage.